Welcome, and thank you for tuning in on Yachting International Radio. My name is Eva Lianne Veldkamp, and you are listening to Maritime Unity, a podcast where we talk about inclusion and safety and how it can change the world that we live in. Today we will talk with Daniel Smith about neurodiversity at sea. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for being on the show. Hi. Could you give us a quick introduction about who you are and what you love to do most?
Yeah, so my name's Daniel Smith, as you've kindly alluded to. Serving Seafarer. I've been a Seafarer now for about 10 years of my life, so just over a third of it, which makes me feel both old and young at the same time. And aside from, I suppose, loving being at sea, the other thing I love doing most really is campaigning for change and acceptance within the community, which is an odd thing to love because in some ways it's, being a masochist and hating yourself and enjoying punishment. But, it gets there, hopefully. Keeps me entertained, if nothing else.
Well, before we press record, we were already talking a little bit. And I think, thank you for the introduction. But you're really campaigning for the right things, I think. And I'm really looking forward to talk with you today on this podcast, because I think neurodiversity at sea, it's just such a good topic to talk about in all different aspects. So really looking forward. And thank
Likewise.
You for being here. Yeah.
Thank you. Hopefully I don't bore you to death today. I'll try and keep it entertaining and funny and jokey, but it's my northern wit. It may completely backfire, in which case I apologize to people who are listening who go, I have no idea what he's talking about. That may happen a couple of times. Well, stick with us and we'll soldier through. Fingers crossed.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah.
That's one way of putting it.
This is a good promise. Okay, let's start with the first thing, the very basics understanding, because I think I can speak for a lot of people so some people never heard of neurodiversity or what neurodiversity is, even the term, like the definition.
Yeah.
So if you would describe it, how do you describe it?
So neurodiversity is a really big, scary word. But actually, if you boil it down to really simplistic language, it is different brains. Neuro means brains, diversity is different. Gross oversimplification, but that's kind of what it means. Mm-hmm. So in society, because this is all a big societal thing, really, if nothing else, there's two ways of thinking about it. You have neurodiversity, mm-hmm. or you have just normality. Normality is the one that we want to strive for, where everybody is just treated as being a normal human being, no matter how different, your brain is or how different it works. But society being what it is, we're not at that stage yet. So instead what we say is everybody has a natural neurodiversity within the world, which means we all think a little bit differently because our brains are a bit different. But we kind of want to separate things out because human beings being what we are, we like to put things in nice little boxes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you have people who society, and again, I hate using the word society, but you're going to keep hearing me say it, and I apologize. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You have neurotypical people who act the way society deems is the norm. Mm-hmm. So that's, Mr. and Mrs. blogs or Mr. and Mex blogs or whatever else. You then have people who society deems act a bit differently from everybody else because their brains are different from everybody else. And those are what you call neurodivergent people, mm-hmm. because their brains have diverged from what we consider normal. In reality, that essentially means people who are autistic, like myself, hello world, ADHDers, so people with ADHD, so that's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is a mouthful to say, or people who have what are called SPLDs, or specific learning differences. So that's dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. Some people expand the definition of neurodiversity beyond that to include OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder, Tourette's syndrome, certain types of anxiety and depression. So it's mm-hmm. for the purpose of this conversation, we'll stick to the more traditional definition, which is autism, ADHD, and SPLDs. Mm-hmm. So dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, the one I haven't mentioned. Also bear in mind that because the definition is changing quite a lot, some of what I say can also apply to other conditions like OCD and Tourette's. It's just a case of when society catches up and decides what this term it has invented actually means.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this very clear description, because
I hope it wasn't too complex.
Oh, no. Well, at least I think it was really... But I have a couple of questions to dive a little bit deeper into this, because I wanted to raise my hand as well when you described things that you just mentioned, when you described neurodiversity as being not neurotypical. Because, and maybe I hope that a lot of other people who are listening will recognize this from themselves, because then we can really understand that we are all different and we are all the same, and that norms are just an idea, right? It's just an idea that we have, are how things should be. Like things should be. Like that's so vague.
It's what society deems as being the way things are.
Yeah, so what I'm really interested in is, let's say your brain has a certain capacity, and that being your intelligence, your emotional intelligence, your sensitivity, everything that your mind and brain is able to do, right? Let's call it abilities or capacities, I don't know. How can you then relate to neurodiversity? So what I'm trying to ask, I think, is because for myself, I think I fit in a lot of the things that I recognize from people who are diagnosed with autism, and from people who are diagnosed with ADHD, or people who are diagnosed with learning disabilities. And I really don't like the term disabilities, because I don't.
That's why I use difference. I'm the same. It's to me, it's a difference. There is within the community. So by the community, the neurodivergent community.
Yeah.
There is a lot of debate between difference versus disability, and which word suits best.
Yeah.
And I like to think of it as both. On some days, being neurodivergent can be disabling on your really bad days, because it can make certain tasks really hard. But on other days, it doesn't disable you. You can still function well. You could still look after yourself, still do your job, whatever else. And on those days, I class it as a difference, not a disability. A lot of people don't like that, because a lot of people don't want to differentiate between the differences in how it affects you day to day. A lot of people just see it as a difference or disability, but I think for me the best approach is to sort of split it up into it being both disabling some days and also just a difference other days.
Yeah.
But that again is an unpopular opinion.
Well, and maybe, so sorry for interrupting, because I really think this is what I try to say, because instead of talking about the negative consequences of having a diverse brain on days that you have so much to deal with, right? Then it can look like a disability. But on other days, when you have the right support systems, when you know what to do, when you have guidance, when you have people around you, when you have structure, whatever you need to cope with the things you have in your brain, on those days, it really is really positive to have a diverse brain. So can we dive a little bit more into that, because that was what I was aiming for, because
so
when you start to feel a little bit more confident about your own capacities, you can also see the positive effects way better.
So this kind of, I guess, is a really nice way of tying your previous question up to this one as well. So the way, so traditionally neurodivergent conditions were seen as, autism is the medical definition of autism, which is X, Y, and Z. ADHD is X, Y, and Z. That's it. What we're now realizing is it's more, some people call them spiky profiles, some people will call them like spider diagrams. Whereas if you imagine you have the person in the middle of a page, and you have lines coming out from that, let's say, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. And each one of those lines represents some part of what you could call functioning. 12 o'clock might be social skills or communication. 2 o'clock might be executive function, which is stuff like, cooking, cleaning, just the everyday human stuff we all have to live with, that we all despise doing for the most part. Exactly, that sort of stuff. My bed's an absolute mess at the moment, speaking thereof, but anyway, that's a different day. 4 o'clock might be written communication, your ability to write something down. 6 o'clock might be logical thinking, whatever it may be, right? Yeah. And these continue all the way around this thing.
Yeah.
We now recognize that actually each condition is just a spiky profile. So it might be that, there's an average. So you go 12 o'clock. So my communication, 12 o'clock. Say if you're autistic, normally that's going to be a 3, say, for example. It doesn't have to be, let's say, a 3, right? Executive functioning might be a 5. So you're okay at it most days. Written communication, it's going to be a 10. Being autistic doesn't really impair that if you're high functioning or if you're low support needs, depending on which definition you want to use. And then whatever else we go along. But as we then have our good days and bad days, and as our environment around us changes, where we sit with those numbers will change. Yeah. So if I'm in a really comfortable position with people I know and I'm really happy speaking to, my communication is going to be, an 8 or a 9 because there's no real impairment there.
Yeah.
But if you throw me in a room that's really busy, really loud, I'm struggling to process all this sensory information that's coming at me.
Yeah.
With people that I don't know that maybe don't speak my language, or they might speak broken English, for example, or I don't speak their language, or I can speak, maybe 3 words of their own language.
Yeah.
Then my communication is going to be a 1 because I'm going to really find that difficult.
Yeah.
And so what we're now doing as both the medical community and also society is realizing that actually how we perform as human beings will change day to day based on our environment and what's on around us.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of what I want to push for is recognizing that it is not the person that's disabled, it is the environment that they're in that's disabling.
Yes.
And if you change the environment, all of a sudden the person's not hampered by it, so they can now be their true potential.
Yeah. That's such a nice way of putting it. Thank you so much for doing that, because it shows everything. You're absolutely right. And also it shows how you can, if you have the right environment, how you can really, even as an employer or as a team leader or as a team member or as yourself, how you can really take the best of what you have.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be every day, because sometimes the best of what you have is just sleeping, because that's what you have and that's what you have to give to yourself. So yes, I'm closing my eyes and I'm staying in my bed. And because I was totally overwhelmed before, or because, sometimes you don't even know why, but that's at that moment. But at other days, you're just so productive and that's what you have that day. And then if you have the right environment, you can really use it so well for the right thing.
Yeah,
and you can focus and achieve goals. Yes.
It's recognizing that it's not you that's causing these numbers to fluctuate. It's stuff around you. And some days that stuff around you may unfortunately mean that those numbers are going to be, zeros or ones that day. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And other days, those numbers are going to be 9s and 10s. And that's great too.
Yeah.
Admittedly, it's something I struggle with. We talked about before we started recording here that I'm still at a point where I look at my numbers and go, it's a 0 today. That's really bad. I should feel awful for myself. But that's why I have a therapist.
Mo, that's a good way of putting it, because then you can have empathy and compassion for yourself as well. And you can just ease a little bit into what you really need and give yourself that, or ask help from somebody else. That's a good way of putting it. I really love that. I will try to do that as well, because I can use it sometimes to just see it very, like you just explained. That's nice. And also, while you were talking, I thought, well, then we all have a neurodiverse brain, because I think everyone has these things. But do you know this game called The Sims from back then?
Yes. Yeah, it is literally like being a sim in many ways. See, I'm really hesitant with the idea of everybody being neurodivergent or neurodiverse, because in many ways, that kind of thinking can take away from people who actually have these conditions.
Yeah.
I understand where society comes from when they say, oh, we're all a bit different. And yes, we are a bit different. It's just how society works. But we have to be very careful that we don't start saying everybody is neurodivergent, because we're not. Not everybody's autistic, for example. Not everybody has ADHD.
Yeah, we're all different. If we recognize that we're all different, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're all the same being different. I think this is what you tried to say, right? You really have to recognize some of the, and some people really have high spikes. And if you say, no, I am also, but my spike is not as high as yours. Like we can,
it's, because again, that's another issue that, traditionally, so let's take autism, for example, because that's the one I have personal experience of. A lot, traditionally autism has been seen as, you fit into two groups, right? You have those who cannot function without 24 hours, 7 day a week care, which is, that's still a thing. Or it is seen as people who are what in the UK we call savants. So people who are absolutely fantastic at one specific thing. So that may be mathematics, it may be physics, like think of your Sheldon Cooper, essentially. Or they may have, the ability to recall things in finite detail and produce extremely intricate pieces of art. But that's not the case. That's not how autism actually is. It is this splinter cell, this spiky diagram.
Yeah.
And it's sort of recognizing that just because someone's spike is higher than everybody else's, doesn't mean that person has this condition and everybody else has to have the same level of just giant spike at this particular point.
Yeah.
It is a condition, and just every other condition affects you differently. With it being a spectrum, we all have different spiky diagrams.
Yeah, and I think that's good, right? Because that shows you're human and that you're not a computer program.
We're not all just the same copy-paste, the same human being that's been printed out in ad infinitum.
Yeah, because that's interesting. Let's dive into that a little bit more. Because let's say you're an employer or, somebody who is trying to reach a goal of an organization or a company or, a structure that doesn't have a heart. Let's say that. So not a human being, but like an organization or a company. So then you have goals that are not it's not a lived experience, this goal. So you would have for example, you would approach things at the risks-based assessment, right? So you would say, to reach these goals, I have this and this risks. And then what you see, at least very much see in the maritime sector always, is that you can then have the human element as part of it, but that's even also brought down to not humans anymore. Then you see dehumanization a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's because you just totally ignore that a human being always will have these spikes that you were just described. And then for some people, the spikes are really high and they need a lot of care for that, like dailies, as you just very well pointed out. And for some people, it looks different. But to just ignore and just push people into a way that almost feels like a computer program, to me, sometimes, that just takes away, it misses the solution. Because I think the solution lies in just accepting that we're focusing on autonomous shipping, for example, but we should focus on autonomous human beings. Because if you put... So do you understand what I mean, or am I too trembled right now?
I think I understand what you're trying to say. So I think the issue we have in maritime is we are very risk averse. So we do not like taking risks if we think there's even the slightest chance of something going wrong, which is in some ways very commendable, but in other ways isn't. If you compare the way air transport works in maritime and how the safety cultures differ, you could argue that being risk averse in the way that we are risk averse isn't helping us, because we have more accidents than we do in the air. Despite saying that we have a safety culture, well, we don't really, do we? Because we can't be saying that we have a zero blame culture when we obviously do blame people, and yet air transport does have a zero blame culture, put my teeth in properly, and doesn't have many accidents. The accidents that do have are reported enough that we can learn from them. But that's because that's how we operate in maritime, that we are just looking at anything that can go wrong going, that's a risk. We will look at our seafarers, our mariners, and do the same thing. It's why we have so many procedures on board, for example. We have a procedure for doing almost everything. I'm quite sure there's some ships that have procedures for going to use the bathroom, for example. That would not surprise me. Because we don't understand that human beings, being what they are going to act a bit differently. So we try and shoehorn them into boxes that we, on the shore, well, when I say we, as a seafarer, I'm not yet working ashore, but that's a different thing, different day. Shoreside, they will try and shoehorn people into a very specific image of a human being. So they remove that autonomy that people have. And they insist that people act in a very structured, certain way.
Yeah, and I think in this example, the shoreside doesn't even have a heart because it's an organization. It's a
yes,
company.
It is driven entirely by, in some ways, profit and loss.
Yes.
Is allowing people to be autonomous going to harm us, or is it going to help us profit-wise?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because we are so accustomed to seeing things in that light, we don't know how to take a step back from that and go, right, so whilst in some ways, yes, it is fantastic to have procedures for things and make sure they are followed, because in some cases we do need to have procedure for doing stuff. I'm not going to argue that. There are certain circumstances that actually having someone who thinks a bit differently or does things a bit differently can be really helpful. So an example I like to use is, let's say we have a fire on board. Worst case scenario, like every mariner's nightmare. It's making my heart palpitate just talking about it, right? So let's say we have an engine room fire. So worst the worst. And to complicate things, we have a missing member of the engineering crew.
Yeah.
So we have someone who is trapped in a burning engine room. Now, if we were to follow a ship that had no neurodivergent people on board, the person who's in control of that accident or emergency is going to be okay to manage it. But the moment things start going a little bit sideways and we start throwing in bad weather and we start throwing in the CO2 system might not be able to work, or that might be the only way to put the fire out, we had to make a decision between, do we let the engine room burn, or do we try and send a fire party in with no fire hose, no way of backing them up? So do we now condemn that person to die, whatever else? That's how, that's unfortunately what will happen in the maritime industry when we don't allow people to think differently. But if you put someone in that situation who has ADHD, for example, some of the ADHD, 9 times out of 10, their brain, the way my partner describes it, as they have about 20 different tabs open at once.
Yeah.
And all of them are like playing YouTube videos, and all of them are playing at the same time, the same volume. Yeah. And they're just like flicking between each tab just at random to find something that's interesting, right? Now, someone who has ADHD is going to absolutely thrive in an environment where things are just going completely wrong.
Yes.
But you've got someone who is trapped in the engine room that's on fire. You've got, a fire party that has basically, you've got enough BAF to send a fire party and a rescue party for them, if you're lucky. The boat's rocking and rolling. The nearest rescue is days away. Someone that ended up with ADHD is going to thrive in that situation. They're going to go, okay, do this. Oh, that's changed. That's fantastic. That's giving me a dopamine rush. Right, let's do this instead then. Yeah. And that's what we miss out on because we are so used to shoehorning things into people or removing people's ability to be autonomous in those situations.
Yes.
And removing their ability to think for themselves and saying that you must go by a checklist. We don't help ourselves.
Yes, and also what you very clearly described right now is that you can be creative if you're able to be authentic. So if you can only be creative if you are authentic. So in this case, I'm not sure, because also if you have your survival mode on, you cannot be creative because you have the red flag flying. I'm not sure, and I really understand what you mean, because it really dives into the capacities that you miss out on if you treat people like they're computer systems. If you put them into a structure like that.
In those situations, whilst the survival mode will kick in eventually, it won't kick in straight away.
Yeah, because of the dopamine rush, you mean? Yeah.
Well, not so much that. It's more a case of, it'll only kick in when you realize that there is no hope left for you, that you have to basically jump or burn.
Yeah.
But if you can put the fire out before you get to that situation, you're not in survival mode, are you? So it's about how you use the time you have before things go completely south where it is just a case of the human nature takes over, that really matters. In those situations with someone who has ADHD, because you're going to stop yourself getting to that point in the first place, because you can go and put the fire out now, because you have got the person out of the engine room, because the person with ADHD has found a completely off-the-wall solution for fixing it that you'd never think of. But then it's just, well, what do you mean you didn't think about that? It's the same thing if we use a different example.
That's interesting.
If we use a different example.
Yeah, well, if you can just pause, because I have a very a nugget of discovery right now. Because I think when your red flags start to wave and your nervous system takes over, your survival mode depends on your neurodiverse spikes, I think.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah, it does. It does. Okay. Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, to choose a different example that might be a little bit less off the wall, right? So let's switch to someone who has autism, for example. Mm-hmm. Most of the mariners who listen to this podcast will have been through some form of audit or inspection, whether it's port state control or a charterer one or an industry one. And we all know that there are some port state control inspectors who walk on board who will just try and find anything and everything that's wrong. Mm-hmm. And in those situations, you need someone who can recount all the different rules and regulations basically off the top of the head. Mm-hmm. Now, someone with autism, for the most part, that's kind of an autistic trait, being able to recall information, read information, absorb it quite quickly. It's an autistic trait. It's not always, of course, but it's a more common one, shall we say.
Yeah.
Now, someone who doesn't have autonomy may know that and may go, the thing that PSC person is talking about is all the garbage, but because they've had the autonomy removed to go and shout up and speak up about it, they're not going to say anything.
Yeah.
They'll just go, yes, Mr. Inspector, or yes, Mrs. Inspector.
Yeah.
And not talk about it. Whereas someone who has the autonomy will go, hang on a minute, no, that's not quite right, Inspector, and this is why. And when you start doing that, you suddenly find that actually you have less detentions in your fleet now because people aren't scared to stand up and speak up. They're actually going to go and fight for your ship, fight for the rest of the party, fight for the crew and say, no, that's not right. All of a sudden, you're not detained anymore. You can go about your business and take your cargo to where it is, get your money. Whereas if you have someone who's not autonomous, who can't be autonomous, but you're detained, that makes your ship look bad. Insurance goes up. If you're unlucky, you get kicked out your flag to a different flag because all of a sudden you have too many detentions in your fleet. Or you're going to bring yourself attention when you go to, say, Australia, where PSC over there, the moment you have one detention for your fleet, that's it. Everybody gets inspected the next day type thing.
Yeah.
And it's about realizing that actually, when we give people autonomy to do themselves, you do make money from it. You can profit from it. Yeah. You just have to realize it.
Yes. And also, so that's a very clear description of a psychologically safe workplace, I think.
Yes.
And I think what happens a lot is that you can even have consequences, negative consequences. So the fear of not speaking up about something that you have inside of your head, which may be a solution, that you're holding it back. That's the unsafe environment.
Yep.
And then the consequences just shows where you as an employer, as an organization, really miss out on the things you can very much benefit from. Because that was one of the last questions for today. And that's about, so anyone, I hope, first of all, I really hope that if you are listening to this, that it was valuable, because it was so nice to speak with you, Daniel. And I hope that anyone
likewise
who is listening today can really have value from what we spoke about. And I hope, let us know if you did. So before we go into the last question, talking about structure, can you please tell us, because I know you have an amazing website and an organization called Neurodiversity at Sea, and it's just doing amazing things. So before we go to our last question for employers and companies and organizations, can you please tell us where to find you?
Yes, so we have a website. So that's www.neurodiverseatsea.org. So I can spell it out for people who perhaps don't quite know how that's spelled. So I'll have to spell it out myself first. Yeah, probably easier. Everywhere. But that's neurodiverseatsea.org. There's lots of information there about different neurodivergent conditions, help and resources, some screening tools if you want to go and find out for yourself if you might be neurodivergent or not. We have some tools on there. You can sit through some multiple choice questions. They'll give you a rough score. Or if you want to reach out to us on there, you're more than welcome to. We do try and help and support anybody who comes to us with questions, queries. We try and be approachable.
You are.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
Hence who it is.
Definitely. And I also know that you're doing great work getting neurodiversity onto the diversity agenda, because I think a lot of companies and organizations and people really try to work on making their organization more safe for people to work in. And then you see a general focus on diversity, which I think, is necessary to create an inclusive environment. So I really like the things you share also on your LinkedIn page and on the website and everything you do by getting this onto the diversity and inclusion agenda. So can you please tell us more, because it's amazing.
It's a battle, shall we say. But yeah, so some of the things we've done recently is I've recently written to Maritime UK's chief executive, because they have, for some reason that I cannot fathom, completely missed neurodiversity from their Maritime UK diversity pledge, which did somewhat make me blow a blood vessel, shall we say, when I first read it. We have done a lot of work, and we're now going to do a lot more work going forward in marine autonomy to try and make sure that marine autonomy is accessible as it can be and is very, open to being diverse, because I think that represents an amazing opportunity for people who either are struggling at sea or maybe can't work at sea at the moment because of medical conditions and ENG limitations. Being able to work on land but still being involved in sea is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important that we as an industry harness that opportunity and actually make the most of it, because we're not going to get it again. It's basically all or nothing at this point, isn't it, when it comes to that? So we're doing a lot of work there, doing some work behind the scenes to try and change the way things work in the UK for examinations and for cadets coming through, and a lot of it is just advocacy. It is, without wanting to blow my own horn and make it sound like I am some larger-than-life character, which I do try not to be, without making it sound like the group is the best thing on the planet, which it definitely isn't by any stretch of imagination. One of the big things we are trying to do is just to be a voice for the community and say, look, there are people like you who struggle, just like you struggle. That's okay to struggle. We're all here together. We're all trying to change the way things work. You have a voice now. You're not invisible. You're not alone. Which is, if there's anything I want people to take away from this conversation with you today, it is that those people who are struggling because of their neurodivergent condition, whether they know they have it or not, you're not alone. There are people out there like you. I mean, I'm one, for example, but do struggle sometimes. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to be different. It's not your fault you struggle. It's the environment you're in that's the reason you struggle. That's not okay. And it won't be that forever. Things will change. So don't be afraid to reach out for help, for support, because it is out there. If I can actually, one more thing I want to sort of bring up. We're working with ICE1 to develop a neurodivergent specific training program for their advisors about their Seafarer helpline. So don't be scared that you can't, don't think you can reach out to these places. They won't know what you're on about. They won't understand your conditions, because they now do. I can tell you they now do, because we're working together with them to make sure they do. So the help is out there that understands you as well. If you do need that help, please don't be scared to don't suffer in silence.
No, yes.
Reach out for help, support. It is there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And so that's really, very important. And thank you so much for being this voice for all of the people who are now, afraid or unable or not able, don't have the ability to use their voice right now, because you're doing it. And thank you so much for doing it, because it really creates the change that we need. And we can also see it already. And so to anybody listening, please follow Daniel on LinkedIn and just, share the Neurodiversity website to everyone that is interested, and just talk about this together, because I think then you can discover so much more. So thank you so much for doing this work. And we will make sure that we share the links also below this post to every part of information that might be valuable for anyone. And I would like to invite you into another episode, actually, because I think we are not ready.
There's a lot more. We had a whole sheet of questions. We haven't even touched on 3 of them.
Yeah, so thank you so much for that. That will be amazing. I have to say,
I'll be talking too much.
Yeah, for the listeners who were watching us also on video, I have to say this.
Oh dear, here we go.
Yeah, because my daughter just hopped in, because we're a little bit over the time, and my daughter just hopped in and she said hi, and then I muted, and then she became part of the video, and you were talking. So anyway,
I'm very impressed that you managed to multitask and do 2 things at once. I would have struggled at that point. Yeah, you probably would notice me waving in the background as my partner just walked past and went, "Oh," I was like,
yeah. So sorry for everybody, for anyone who saw that, and sorry if you got interrupted or distracted. It was
don't worry. Honestly, at this point, I'm used to it by now.
Yeah, and
the amount of meetings I've had
to keep things real on this podcast. So yeah, this was a reality check.
I did one a couple of weeks ago where someone's dog just randomly jumped from the desk, and that was just like, "Oh, there's a dog," and just like, "Oh, shouldn't have said that in the middle of a podcast, should I?"
It's like, that's nice. I really love it.
I got really jealous of that person.
I hope you don't mind. So that was my amazing daughter. You just saw popped into the screen saying hi really loud. But
I said hi back, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you so much for being here today. For closing
Likewise,
out.
Go on. Sorry, ask the final question.
Yes. I think we already addressed this. My final question was what employers can do, but I think you can.
I've got a whole speech prepared for this, but I'll keep it light.
Nice. Yeah, we can talk about another episode. We're making a whole episode about this.
Yes, I guess the biggest thing is to be accepting and to be welcoming. To understand that when someone is neurodivergent and they're reaching out to you as an employer for help and support, that person is terrified. Because to them, it has become a case of they either reach out for help and support or they leave. And 9 times out of 10, that person's experiences of reaching out for help and support because of their neurodivergent condition have not been good. They have faced ridicule, they have faced bullying, harassment, you name it, they've been through it. So when they're coming to you and saying, "Look, I need some help and support here," don't just sack them and get rid of them. Don't view them as being difficult. Take the time to sit down with them to understand what their issues are, what they're struggling with, and how you can help them. Because that person will know 9 out of 10, I'm struggling with this, and if we change this a little bit, it's going to make my life so much easier. And the changes won't be massive. They're not going to break the bank. And 9 times out of 10, those changes are going to help everybody else as well. Because chances are, if that person is struggling with them, so is the rest of the crew. It could be something as simple as, that person would like a bit more notice as to when they're going to travel out to a ship. That's not really difficult to do. And that's a big gripe of a lot of seafarers. They get a last-minute call to go on a ship for 6 months, for example. Or it might be that they really would like a weighted blanket on board, which costs, I don't know, $50, $60 tops for a good one. They could just stick it in the cabin somewhere out the way, and when they feel like they really need it, they can use it, and that person's going to then sleep a lot better, have a lot nicer, be a lot more energetic when they're awake, be able to job a lot better, a lot easier, because they now have this less sensory stuff. And that weighted blanket doesn't just help that person, it's also great for anxiety, for depression. So if you then have a member of crew who's having a bit of a really difficult time, and they want to use it, all of a sudden you're creating a safer environment for your crew.
Yeah.
And that simple $50 thing has had a massive impact on the crew now. And you can now say that you're creating a safer workplace, which means you got better PR out of it. Not that I like using this as a PR thing, but ultimately we have to make it, positive for them.
Yeah.
Better PR, which means that you're a more trusted organization, which means that you may will be able to take better value cargo, higher value cargo.
Yeah.
So yeah, just accept people for who they are. Understand that if they come out for your help and support, that's not a bad thing. If anything, see it as a positive, because it means that you're creating an environment where people feel they can be safe enough to be vulnerable to you.
Exactly. And so this is, yes, that's very well put. And that is what you really can do as an employer. Yeah. And also it can be discovery, because we're all in this together, right? So it can be a discovery towards, a safe environment where we can, work together on this, and then we can all thrive.
Yes.
So the person and the company, the employer and the employee, the big and the small, with all the spikes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's nice. Thank you so much for explaining that so well. And let's make another episode about this, because I think
there's a lot we can talk about.
Yeah, it's been really nice. So
likewise, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So before closing, I really want to ask you one more question. And I'm asking this to all the guests on my show. So I'm making this podcast here on Yachting International Radio because my biggest wish for us all is to see and recognize the human kindness within ourselves and the other. So my question to you is, what makes you feel human and a part of humankind?
Oh, acceptance. To use a single word, acceptance. To expand the single word, acceptance for who we are. Acceptance for each other. Because ultimately, that's all anybody will want to be, is to be accepted for who they are.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. That's really, really wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's very relatable. I love that. So thank you so much, Daniel, for this interview and for being with us today.
You're most welcome. Like I say, it's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it was wonderful to have you. And also thanks to all the listeners today. I hope you learned a little bit more about inclusion and safety and about neurodiversity. And feel free to share if you did, also with other people or in the comments below. And before we say goodbye, please remember to stay grateful to the earth and open to the universe always. So tot ziens and see you on the next episode.